Thank you, Shelley, for being willing to join us as part of our 1 in 3 campaign and being willing to share your story with us.
Happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Okay, so to start off, can you tell us more about yourself, where you grew up, what your life was like, just what was early childhood for Shelley?
So I grew up in Sacramento, and I grew up with parents that were very young, teen parents, and I grew up very poor, um, on welfare, um, just going to various schools, being bullied, lived in, poor neighborhoods most of my life, up until I'd say around sixth grade. Moved in. My father was an addict. It started with alcohol, and then he was in and out of jail most of my childhood for DUIs, and and then eventually he turned to harder drugs and was in and out of prison for doing drugs, selling drugs, more DUIs, and that was the kind of the life I had. My mom, although she wasn't an addict, she wasn't very present in my life. And I don't know if it's because she was just such a young mother, but she would mostly try to take us over to a family member's house and drop us off and leave us there. And then she would go out and hang out with her boyfriends. I think her drug was her boyfriends. I just remember her dating different men, because my father would go to jail or prison. And I think to deal with that, she would turn to men. And so that was really what was important to her. I never felt important. And when my father was out of prison, I loved my dad. I love my dad very much. He's not with us today, but even though he was not the best influence for me, um, I knew that he loved me. And but unfortunately, the influence that he was in my life impacted me. And I ended up, like most children who follow in their parents' footsteps, um, I ended up following in his footsteps and became an addict, a drug dealer, and eventually an inmate.
Yeah, and you talked about this a little bit in your TEDx talk. And tell us about that first time you used alcohol with your dad and just how it progressed from there.
Yeah, I was, I think, around 9 years old, and I had a friend sleeping over. It was, I think, a Friday night, and my dad went and got a case of beer. He loved, I think it was, yeah, it was Budweiser beer. He loved Budweiser. And we were bored, and my dad must have had a buzz, and he asked us if we wanted to play a game. And the game was quarters. So he put a shot glass in the middle of the table, and he filled it with beer, and he taught us how to bounce the quarter into the glass. And if we made it into the glass, we had to take the shot. And we thought this was so much fun. And I thought the beer tasted so gross, but it was fun bouncing the quarter into that cup and then just playing this game with my dad, right? And it's so funny because in a weird way, it was like a bonding experience, even though he was getting me drunk. Well, I ended up getting pretty intoxicated, and I remember waking up the next day just feeling horrible. And that was my first experience of using any kind of substance and the effects of that. So,
Yeah. And then tell us about how it progressed from there. What was your path to the justice system? When were you first arrested? How did you become an inmate?
yeah. So, because of the influence, I think, of my my father, and I naturally gravitated towards people who like to party, who were not following the rules of society, so to speak, into breaking the law. I don't know. I just, I think because of my dad. And so in junior high, I started hanging out with kids that like to party. I started experimenting with weed and then eventually harder substances as I got a little bit older, like probably around 17, 18 years old. I tried meth for the first time and just really started going down a path that was not going to lead to something positive. Um, and then by the age of 26, I became a full addict. It wasn't just recreational use anymore. I was using every day. I was using to function, and I was using methamphetamine and also prescription pills. So it started out recreational, but then it became, eventually like if you keep doing that, you'll become addicted at some point. And so I definitely became addicted and that became my life. And so for me, I was always a user. And when I say that, what I mean is I never sold drugs until later, way later in my life. But I was always afraid of going to prison because I saw what happened to my dad. So I would always try to stay under the radar for the most part. I wouldn't sell drugs. I would just consume them. There were a couple times I got in trouble for being under the influence, but nothing major. So I stayed out of, um, getting like a felony conviction. I just was stayed under that radar and just consumed my drugs and tried to lay low. Well, at one point, I moved to North Dakota. I started bartending during the oil boom. And there were times in my life where I tried to get clean on my own, and this was one of them. And when I started bartending, the bartender there had some meth and she said, "Hey, you want to get high?" And me thinking to myself, "Oh, just this one time, it'll be fine. I won't use it again." That's never the case. So I smoked meth that night and that was it. It awakened my addiction. And living out in North Dakota in a rural area, it's really hard to find drugs. I think North Dakota has maybe 1 million people in the entire state. So, you know, um, and I knew all of my people that I associated with uh, in Sacramento were all people that used drugs or sold drugs. So I reached out to one of my friends and asked him to send me some drugs through the mail. And that's where it all started for me. And I was thinking, oh, well, North Dakota, there's not a lot of people. I can totally get away with this. I'll never get caught. So I totally minimized it, didn't. and and then I told myself, I'll only get this 1 ounce through the mail. I'll keep some for myself. I'll sell the rest. I'll pay off my car, and then I'll be done. And then I got a taste of that money. I had really good quality, drugs. And I was like, nope, I can't stop now. Or maybe I'll just do one more. And then before you know it, the feds get wind of what I'm doing. I'm now then trafficking drugs across state lines. So I would do a combination of getting the drugs through the mail and then driving to California to pick up the drugs because I had a package or two that ended up getting lost in the mail. And so that's what prompted me to start driving back and forth. And then I became a meth trafficker. And when the feds heard this, they started following me. I eventually got caught. I sold 2 ounces of meth to a confidential informant. It was a full setup sting operation. And they took that that surveillance to the grand jury, got an indictment, and within a few months, I was arrested
Wow. What state was this
in North
happening?
Dakota.
Oh, in North Dakota.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
continued to do that from North Dakota. Interesting.
yeah.
How did you feel after the sting operation? Walk us through. Then what happened with court? What was going through your mind?
I think I was in shock. I mean, I knew what I was doing could potentially lead me to get arrested, but I didn't think it would have happened that quickly. And I didn't, no way did I ever think it would be the federal government arresting me. And the thing with the federal government is they have much stricter sentencing and they do not play. When you get a charge or when you get arrested by the feds, they have what's called mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. And I don't know who came up with these guidelines, but they're ridiculous. And because of the amount of drugs that I sold, which was really relatively small, if you think about drug dealers and the amount of drugs they sell, like I was not selling that big of amount. 2 ounces is not that much. And based off of the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines, it put me right above the threshold at a 10-year minimum sentence. And if you think about that, pedophiles or people who commit violent crimes don't even get 10-year sentences.
Yeah,
And
insane.
yeah, insane. And when I found that out, I was in complete shock. Like, oh my gosh, 10 years. And then to make matters worse, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, that was just a complete turning point for me. Like, okay, first of all, holy crap, I'm pregnant. Holy crap, I'm looking at 10 years in prison. Whew, I gotta, what am I gonna do?
That is heavy. How
Yeah.
old were you at the time?
I was in my early 30s. I want to say I was around 36. Yeah. And I'd have to do the math. I mean, I'm terrible at math, so. But I think it was I was in my like mid, like 35, 36. So see, my son's 10 now, and I am 46. So I was 36. Yeah.
Wow. So then
Yeah.
what happened with sentencing? What happened with your son?
So first of all, they put me in a local jail for a couple weeks, and I had to go through withdrawals. Now, mind you, I was addicted to meth, prescription pills. And at that point, I was also dabbling with heroin because sometimes it was really hard to get the prescription pills. And so I would supplement with heroin. And so when I was sitting in that jail, and I didn't know I was pregnant at this time because I must have just gotten pregnant, and then got arrested. So I was going through the worst withdrawals and they provided nothing for me. And they finally eventually agreed to let me out into a halfway house. And while I was at this halfway house, they allowed me to work. So I started bartending. And when I got to the halfway house, I was still feeling kind of cruddy. And then I realized I hadn't had my period. So I took a pregnancy test and that's when I realized that I was pregnant. So it was crazy. And so I got a job. I started waitressing. And the whole time I was in the halfway house, there were so many people there that were using drugs. And I was craving drugs. Like my addiction, I had insatiable cravings. I was dreaming about drugs and I would wake up just wanting to get high so bad. and I didn't know what to do. And I knew that if I stayed at this halfway house, I was doomed. They weren't offering any rehabilitation. They weren't teaching me a new way of life. And everyone around me was using. And uh, I eventually used. I had actually had my dad, my dad sent me a pill in the mail in an application for rehab. So he went and printed out this application into this rehabilitation program or drug rehabilitation program. And I asked him to put a, a small pill, opiate pill, in between the pages of the application because there's about 8 pages. Wrap it up in some foil, tape it in the middle because they checked your mail at the halfway house, but I knew they wouldn't go through each page and it was small enough to where they couldn't see it, right? I got that application. I went into the bathroom. I smoked it on the foil. I went and filled out the application and sent it off. And what's interesting is that my probation officer, I had asked her in advance if I could go to this program rather than stay at this halfway house because this halfway house was doing nothing for me except the fact that I could work, but who cares? Like I need to get help.
You need help, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I knew that I would, if I stayed there, I would probably continue bringing in drugs. It's really hard when your addiction is that you're that deep into your addiction to just stop. And I knew I needed to do it not only for myself, but for my child. Like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine the impacts of if I continued using drugs, what that would what that could do to my son. There was actually a girl in the halfway house that was using all through her pregnancy, and her son had was born with a hole in his heart.
Oh,
Yeah.
so heartbreaking.
So I filled out the application. I got accepted into the program. My probation officer told me I couldn't go.
Why?
I have no idea, honestly. And so my probation officer came to visit me one day, and I went and I took her outside to have a private conversation with her, and I just told her, listen, I need help. I am really struggling mentally here, and there's people using drugs all around me. I'd never been to drug treatment before, but I was willing to give it a try, and I was ready to change my life. And I told her this. And so after I explained that to her, she understood. And she says, "Okay, all right, I'll go ahead and approve you to go into this program." And next thing you know, I'm getting picked up by the director of the program, and it was only about 15 minutes away from the halfway house, and I went and lived there. And that's really where my journey of healing mentally, physically, and spiritually began. And boy, it was not easy, I'll tell you.
A
But
lot to overcome, just
yeah, yeah.
years of something different and struggling with a disease. Like it's,
Yeah. And I was I had such a negative outlook and mindset on the world. And so when I got there, I hated all the girls in the program. Everything they did irritated me because I hyper focused on all the negative things. But it wasn't them, it was me. I was the one that was choosing to like focus on these silly things, and it really affected my relationships with all of them. Um, I even almost got into a physical altercation with one of the girls. And it wasn't until I fully surrendered and was like, and I almost got kicked out of the program. And that's what, at that point, when I almost got kicked out of the program, I said, you know what, I'm done. I can't continue to live like this. And I fully surrendered at that moment and opened my heart to everything the program had to offer. And I started to notice changes in me. It was almost like there was this huge weight that had been on my chest that I didn't know. And it slowly was just lifting and lifting. And each day I felt like I could breathe a little bit more. I felt a little bit lighter. And instead of focusing on all the things that I hated about all of the women in the program and what I hated about the program, I started really focusing on the beauty in them and the things I liked about them. And then it's like my brain just started creating new neurons, and then my relationships started getting better. And before I left that program, I bonded with every single one of those girls. And to this day, I still have I still, we're all friends on Facebook. We still, keep in touch. Um, and it just melts my heart to know that I created these bonds with them, and they're all doing well for the most part. And it's just amazing, um, that I was able to wake the hell up and
Yeah, that's
change.
beautiful.
Yeah, it was like this filter, this negative filter on my light that, that covered my eyes was lifted. And now I started to see just a whole new world opened up for me at that point. Because when you stop focusing on everything negative and you start working on yourself and becoming a better person, it's absolutely incredible, like the things that will happen in your life and the opportunities that come your way, and the relationships you will develop, and the people that you start attracting because you're operating on a different frequency, and I'm so grateful for treatment. I was skeptical at first, but it really did teach me a different way of life. And I think too, I was ready for it. Not everybody's, uh, has a successful bout in treatment. It might take two, three, or four times, but for me, I wanted to, and it was mainly because of my son. Because I didn't want, even if I got 10 years in prison, I didn't want to be the same type of parent or role model for that, for, you know, for that reason, even if I spent 10 years in prison, because I still wanted to change my life because I knew at some point I'd be getting out, and I just wanted to be a different person for him.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I've learned. I started my career as public defender about 15 years ago, and it is frustrating to watch someone, to work with someone and really want treatment to work, but and then it not working right. And I think what I learned is you can't change somebody until they're ready to change themselves. And there is this moment that's like almost magical in so many cases where, sometimes you do have to try 5, 6, 7, 10 times. But when someone's ready, they're ready. And
Yeah.
I've seen that transformation so many times, but
Mhm.
also seen people not ready and be stuck in this negative framework that you're describing. And I'm curious for you, what led to you thinking more positively? Like what changed your perspective? What created that ability to go from focusing on the negative to the positive? Was that treatment or was that something else?
So it was a combination of what I learned in treatment, just really focusing. What they do in treatment, is they help you deal with your past, because everything in our future is whatever we're dealing with or struggling with stems from something from our past, you know. And so the key to getting set free in the future is dealing with the trauma from the past. And so that's what treatment had me do. And I did inner child work. And, inner child work is just talking about the things that happened as a child that are traumatic, the stories that I made up about the trauma, and then addressing those issues and then being able to forgive, right? And these are all things that I learned in treatment that weren't things that I had ever thought of, that, like the forgiveness, like there's no way I could ever forgive somebody that wronged me. Why should I? Right. But then I realized the power of it and how by forgiving, it's actually not for the other person, it's for me because I don't have to carry that negativity around, right? And it's just really dealing with the past, forgiving others, forgiving myself, right? And God. It was a faith-based treatment program, and I was basically in a Jesus incubator. I mean, I was in this little Christian cocoon, and I believe, my faith is Christianity, and um, just really leaning because I think, let me go back real quick. So, what I think when it comes to healing, there's three elements, right? Your mind, um, there's mentally, physically, and spiritually. So your mind, body, soul, right? And I was dealing with all three in this program. And that I think is what really helped me move on. I think faith is important no matter what religion you are. I think spirituality is very important as we try to recover and move on, that whatever you believe in, like lean on that as well. Make that a part of your life. But it takes a lot of work. Um, and I'd say personal development and continuing that. Even today, I don't stop my personal development. I'm always seeking new opportunities to learn more about myself, learn a different way of life. Instead of going on just normal vacations, I seek out like wellness retreats.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. I I seek out more personal development programs. I've done Landmark. I've done a lot of personal development. I hang out with like-minded people who also are very much into personal development. So yeah, it's journey, but you have to keep on it. You can't just, for me, I feel like you can't just do one thing and then stop because you'll end up going back eventually. You get stagnant. You have to keep going, keep evolving, and you have to be open to it and you have to want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more about your son. So you're in this treatment program. Did you have your son while in that program, or
Mhm.
when was he born? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so I did have my son while I was in the treatment program. Thank God. They gave me 2 weeks to spend with him. So my mom flew up, was there for the birth, and then she rented a hotel room for a couple weeks and got to spend that 2 weeks with my baby. And it was, of course, at the time I was like, I want more.
Of course.
Yeah. That was amazing, but yet very difficult for me. Just like amazing that they gave me the 2 weeks, but then difficult because, I had to, after those 2 weeks were up, it was like, no, like, I want my baby back, and
Of course.
yeah. Um, but I gave birth to him October 1st, 2014. And I had a chance. It's interesting too, because I had an opportunity to stay in the program and graduate, and it was going to be another 6 months of the program, or I could turn myself in and start my sentence and get out earlier to be with my son. And I decided to start my prison sentence because for me, extending it another 6 months, I just wanted to get it over with and get home.
Yeah, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
how long was your sentence?
It was 4 years. Yeah. So I didn't end up getting 10 years. And there were some factors that contributed to that. Like I accepted responsibility for my crime. I I was a first time offender, like as far as anything major. And so that really helped when it came to the sentencing, and the judge was able to stray from the guidelines. So the judge can only stray from the guidelines if certain criteria is met, and that criteria was met. So he did lower it to 4 years, which at the time I'm like, 4 years. I was hoping he was just going to give me probation or be lenient with me because I just had a baby. And nope, nope. He said, Miss Winter, just because you had a baby doesn't mean that you don't, you know, have to pay for, suffer the consequences for what you've done. And unfortunately, you broke the law. And I was just like, oh my God. My mom was there. She flew back out with my son. So I got to see him again. I think I got to spend another week with him before I went and turned myself in. And uh, that was really tough.
No, I'm sure. I can't even
Uh,
imagine. And
yeah.
then were you able to see him during your period of incarceration? Was he in your mother's care? And were you allowed to have visits at the facility where you were?
So the one thing, yes, and the one thing the judge did, which I'm so grateful for him for doing this, even though he sentenced me to 4 years, but hey, everything happens for a reason. I can't complain about it, right? And I didn't end up serving 4 years in prison anyways, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But the judge, I told him, like, listen, the only women's federal prison near my home is in Dublin, California, which is in the Bay Area. And so it's about, I don't know, hour 45-minute drive from Sac. So I requested that he would send me there so that way I could visit with my son, and he approved it. And that never happens. You never get to go to the prison that you want.
That you want? Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly the federal system. And it is
Yes.
always so weird to me where people get sent.
Oh, I
And
know.
it's like nowhere near family, nowhere near like the positive influences in your
Nope.
life. And
Nope.
you're not setting people up for success.
Oh,
Like what?
it's awful. Yeah, it's awful. But he made sure I got to Dublin, and I'll never forget um walking into prison, not knowing what to expect. I was so scared. All I knew from prison was the stories my dad told me and watching Rock or Locked Up Raw. You know? So I'm like, okay. Well, let's here we go, right? As I get off that bus, I'm shackled, my hands and feet. I go through intake. They get me my bed, my pillow, my hygiene, all of that, right? And then they walk us into our units. And I'll never forget, I walk like getting into the walking into the prison. I'm expecting to see barbed wire and dirt, and that's it. It wasn't like that at all. The prison that I went to, I guess it used to be a military jail. And so it was actually really nice. There were trees and there were flowers and there was green grass, and it didn't look like a prison at all. They walked me over to this unit. When I walked into the unit, there were no cells. I mean, I'm sorry, there were no bars, right? It was wooden doors with handles and a window. Um, I walked into my cell, and there was a big window, and you could open the bottom of the window and let fresh air in. I mean, I was like, what is this place? I'm like, okay, if this is prison, I think I'm gonna be okay. Like, I can make this work.
That's so lucky. That certainly is
Oh
not.
yeah.
But a lot of prisons look like across the country for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I was in shock. I was like, wow, and even though uh, you know, I I mean, I guess I could say I felt grateful to be there. And my mindset coming into prison, I knew there was nothing that I could do. Like, I was going to prison, I was going to have to deal with it. So I would call my dad. Or actually, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, what advice would you give me for going into prison? Because I knew that he was the only one that could really help me navigate this. And so he told me, don't take anything for free from anybody. Hang with your own race. Stay in your own lane, right? Continue on your path, with church and hanging out with people like that. And so I did. But it wasn't like that, like what my dad experienced in the men's prison. It was nothing like that in the women's prison. There was not this racial divide. So you could pretty much hang out with who you wanted. It was not that big of a deal. It wasn't as violent as some of the things that my dad had told me. We didn't have race wars. We didn't have all this, we just had, I think, just crazy, just once in a while we had a crazy fight because two girls that were dating got into it or something. It was
Yeah.
not, it was nothing of like what I expected. And I'm not saying that all women's prisons are like this. It was just the prison I went to is like that. It was a prison where they send, high profile people or people who are famous. Um, so I lucked out for sure.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just this
Yeah,
this conversation of asking your dad for advice on how to like survive prison. It's so sad when you think about it, but intergenerational incarceration is so common. And
yeah.
of course, you're going to ask your dad like how to
Mhm.
survive, but the
Yeah,
whole thing is just so sad. I wonder like what was going through your dad's mind, during that conversation.
yeah. And then my mom would bring my son every couple of months or so to visit with me. And the prison was really good about doing special programs. So there was this one correctional officer that really went out of her way to create these programs where you would have your child all day and they would do activities and games and they would bring, outside food for us to eat. And so I would participate in these programs, and my mom would bring my son at like 8 in the morning, and I'd get him until like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and we would just
Incredible.
bond and hang out. And I'll never forget those times. Not all prisons do that, and this prison did, and I was just so grateful for that.
That's amazing. And so
Yeah.
how long did your sentence end up being when were you released? What did that feel like for you?
Yeah, so I turned myself in October 1st, 2014, and I got out July 21st of 2016. So that's how long I was incarcerated. So, and the reason why I didn't serve the full 4 years, well, part of it's because I had my good time. So, staying out of trouble, if you do what you're supposed to do, you get a certain amount of good time. So I had that. Then I was in this drug rehabilitation program that the feds offer called RDAP. So it stands for Residential Drug Abuse Program. And if you do this program, it's a cognitive behavioral therapy type program. It's very intense, but it's meant to correct your criminal behaviors and your negative behaviors, right? And so if you make it through that program, they'll give you a year off your sentence for that. It's a very, that program was very tough, let me tell you. You are held accountable for everything, right? Down to, they have all these rules, like you can't wear, um, certain shoes. You have to be in uniform after, till a certain time. If you're caught out of your uniform, let's say you're wearing sweats, you're required, like everybody needs to like watch each other, hold each other accountable. So that means telling on each other. And then you get called out for it. Every morning you have what's called an up meeting. and everyone comes together at like 6 or 7 in the morning, and they ask, does anyone have any pull-ups? Because that's when you call the other person out for what they were doing. And then you just watch all these people pulling each other up for different things. And you have to stand up and you have to either accept the pull-up or you have to challenge it. And it is really hard because like your ego doesn't want to, humble. Yeah, like it's hard to get humble in those situations and really face, okay, you know what? I did screw up. Yes, I accept it because you fight it because of your old behaviors, your ways of thinking, your old patterns, right? But it's meant to do that, you're meant to be challenged that way so that you can break down that ego a little bit and really open yourself up to change. And it by the time I left that program, it really did make an impact on me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you're released. Talk to me about your release day. What was that like? Who was there?
So what I wanted to before we go there, let me tell you about prior to my release, because I knew I was going to be released. And while, during my entire time in prison, I focused on my rehabilitation and I focused on God. And the prison had so many programs that, that foundation that I built in at Teen Challenge at that treatment program, I just kept building upon that. And by the time I left prison, I was completely transformed. Like I was ready to take on the world and just um, do big things. Now, prior to my release, I started thinking about what is it that I want to do? Because one of the things that's really important is you need to set your intention. You need to come up with a plan before your release. Like, what do you want to do? What's your goals, right? And figure those out. Because if you don't do any of that prep work and you just get released, you're kind of like, okay, where do I go? What do I do? So I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And for me, I was very specific. I want to work in tech. I want a career. I don't want some dead end job. I want to provide a better life for my child. And I know that working in tech, you're able to have those types of careers. Um, and then what really sealed the deal, I watched a movie, The Internship with Vince Vaughn.
I know it. Yep.
And I thought, you know what? That's where I want to work. That is so cool. I want to work in tech. And so I didn't know how I was going to do this. I knew there was going to be barriers, my criminal record being the main one, not having a college degree being the other main factor. But I still wanted to do it. So I prayed about it. I let God know this is what I want to achieve. I get out of prison, and I remember walking out the doors thinking, wow, I'm done. Like I'm starting the new chapter of my life. I was so excited. Now, I wasn't completely done because I had to go to a halfway house in San Francisco in the Tenderloin, mind you. Yeah. So, like, you want to talk about one of the worst drug cities in the world. Here they place recovering addicts here, right? People shooting up in front of you, people trying to sell you drugs. I mean, it's
Fair.
wild. Yeah, I every day I'd go to work and I'd walk over somebody that was passed out on the sidewalk from shooting up with a needle in their arm. Like it was just that was the norm there. But anyway, but I wasn't gonna let that affect me because I knew that my future didn't depend on what other people did. It depended on the choices I made and who I choose to associate myself with. So when I got to the halfway house, I didn't hang out with any of those people that were doing things they shouldn't be doing. I didn't date any guys. I did later, who's now my husband. But, in the beginning, I was like, no, I'm not going down this path. So I got myself enrolled into college and I started focusing on my studies because I figured that would be the best thing that I could do is get my degree, a computer science degree, and then figure out, after I graduate, what type of job I want to work, in what tech company I want to work at. That was really my plan. Well, it ended up, things ended up getting fast tracked. And I'm in the halfway house downstairs in the day room where the TV is and the news is on. And I think I was getting a cup of coffee and I wasn't really paying attention to the news, except that at this one particular moment, my ears, it caught my attention what the reporter was saying. And she said, if you have a criminal record and you want to work in tech, then Code Tenderloin can help you. They help underserved communities like the formerly incarcerated get meaningful careers in tech. And I couldn't believe my ears. I'm like, is this real? Is this real?
That's amazing.
I know, right? And it's funny how like things work sometimes because I really have to sit back and think, you know what? That timing couldn't have been more perfect for me to hear that at that exact moment. And I signed up for the cohort, and the next thing you know, I'm being interviewed by Microsoft.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So that was kind of how my release was. And one thing that I did was I stayed in a positive mindset. And I think that's super important because everyone was trying to pump fear into me about how horrible this halfway house was and all the drugs that were around. And I knew that regardless of that, I was still in charge of my future and that as long as I stayed on the right path, I was going to be okay. And I just kept that mindset. So you
Oh,
can you can be a victim and say, "Oh, I'm going to the worst halfway house, in probably in California, and oh, it's going to just be awful, and there's so many rules, and they just set you up for failure." Yeah, that's one perspective, but just do what you need to be doing. Stay out of trouble and don't hang out with people that are going to be a negative influence, and you're going to increase your chances of success. Because really, at the end of the day, no matter what happens to us, it's our responsibility to learn and grow and make the best of any situation.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hard to do when you're going through those
Oh,
experiences,
100%.
those patterns of thinking that are so negative. It really takes
Yeah.
intention, as you say.
Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
wouldn't have been that way had I not done all the work
right, right,
because
right.
it takes work to get to that type of mindset, to
Totally,
get to that place. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
So you're interviewing with Microsoft. How did your criminal record or your background affect that process? Talk to us about what that was like.
Yeah, that was a crazy roller coaster ride for me. Um, so I interview for Microsoft and I get hired right on the spot. And in the back of my mind, I'm freaking out. I'm excited. I'm trying to keep my cool, but then I'm thinking about she just told me I have to do a background check. Oh, what am I going to do? Is it my job offer? Am I really going to get this job? And so I came out and was forthcoming with her. And I said, listen, I am so excited that you offered me this job. And yes, I would love to accept this job. But I need to tell you something. I just got out of prison. It was for drugs. It's not who I am today, but I just wanted to tell you this because I know you had mentioned I have to do this background check. And do you think it's going to hinder me from moving forward with the job? And she said that she wasn't sure, that she's not a part of that decision-making process, but to make sure that I was honest about it, because if I lied, then I definitely wouldn't get the job. She says, just be honest about it and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I was. And unfortunately, they rescinded my job offer. But before they rescinded it, I was in a waiting period for I think I'm like a month and a half. Like it was just like crazy long, right? I don't know if they knew I don't think they knew what to do with my background when it came back. We're just like, what? So it took them a little while to get back. And during this time, what they do is they have you do all of the onboarding while you're waiting for the results of the background check. So I was filling out all the paperwork, picking um my medical insurance, whether I wanted Blue Cross or Kaiser, just all these different things. And then at the bottom of one of the emails, it was so interesting too, because they sent it to me. It said, if you have a criminal record and you feel like you've been discriminated against, contact the Fair Chance Ordinance. And then it had a link to the website. I'm like, what is this? So I click on the link. And as I'm reading what this law is, my eyes grew so wide. I was like, I couldn't believe it, what I was reading. This law stated that any company within San Francisco city limits with over 500 employees could not discriminate against your criminal record if you have proof of rehabilitation, which I had. And um, and so I was thinking to myself, I fit the criteria of this law. They can't discriminate against me. They have to give me this job. And I was like, is this real? Real? Like, I'd never heard of anything like this before. I just remember my dad always struggling to find work, especially like meaningful work. He finally ended up finding a good job, but he had to beg them to give him a second chance. And so I was just blown away. I thought, wow, this might be my opportunity to really get this job. This law is really going to help me. And then they came back and rescinded my job offer. And so at that moment, I was really confused because they had just sent me this email with the link to this Fair Chance Ordinance. So clearly they know about it.
Yeah, like came from Microsoft.
Yeah. But here's the thing. The background check, the people in San Francisco HR department knew about the law, but they never communicated it back to Washington, which was where my background check went.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So when it got to Washington and to Redmond, um, when they saw my charges, they were like, nope, absolutely not. And so it's funny because I emailed them back and I said, well, why did you guys rescind my job offer? What about this Fair Chance Ordinance law? And they basically said, we've made our decision, end of discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
talked.
go away. Yeah. And I was in shock because you have to understand, like, when I got that job offer, it was one of the proudest moments of my life because here I was fresh out of prison, getting a job with one of the biggest tech companies in the world. This was my dream. This was what I had envisioned. This was the intention that I had set, and I was achieving this. And so I couldn't hold that in. I told everybody. I
Sure.
posted it on social media. I was just so ecstatic. And then when they rescinded my job offer, it was that moment of embarrassment. Like, what am I going to do now? I just told everybody I got the job, and now I got to go back and tell everybody, just kidding, I didn't get it. And I just remember thinking to myself, am I ever going to be able to move on from this record? Is this always going to be hindering me from success? Am I ever going to have the same opportunities as everybody else? And I just felt the heaviness of all of that. And so I ended up calling the Fair Chance Ordinance, not really thinking that they could probably do that much. I figured there were some loopholes that Microsoft found out about, and even though this law was in effect in San Francisco, that I was not getting my job back. And so when I talked to the lady at the Fair Chance Ordinance and she asked me what company had discriminated against me, she told me, we've never fought a company this big. We're just a small ordinance in San Francisco, but we're willing to fight for you if you're ready to take this on. She said it's going to be an emotional roller coaster. We may not win, but if I'm ready, ready for it, that they'll fight for me. And at that point, I said, let's do it because I didn't want to be left with what if for the rest of my life. And I knew if I didn't fight, I would be. And I just wanted to see if it would work. And if it didn't, it wouldn't be for lack of trying. So I went toe to toe with one of the world's biggest tech companies. And, we went back and forth. They had every reason in the book to not hire me. I'm untrustworthy. I'm a liability. What if I go back to prison? All of these, I guess, normal kind of excuses or reasons why companies don't want to hire people with a criminal record. And I'm not mad at them for that either, because this is kind of new, uncharted territory for Microsoft. And there's that stigma and that fear that's society implants into our brains. And so it was just normal, thinking for them. I wasn't mad about it. Um, but the Fair Chance Ordinance lady said, listen, we have these laws in place for a reason, and they're to help people, re-enter society, become contributing, successful, members of society, and and move on from this. It's not who they are. And just because you're Microsoft doesn't mean you don't need to have to follow these rules. And Microsoft said, well, we never heard of this law. And they were not very happy about the law.
I'm sure that.
Yeah. And they said, okay, fine. After they realized that the law was real and that they were being, their feet were being held to the fire. They said, okay, fine. Well, the job that she originally applied for has been filled because it's been so long. But there is another job opening. It's the same role, but she's got to re-interview, and there's two other applicants that she's up against. And I was just like, oh my gosh. This is just going to be their way of legally now not hiring me because they're going to say somebody better interviewed, somebody more qualified interviewed. And I just felt sick to my stomach. I remember going into that interview just more nervous than usual. I didn't do very well in the interview. And the last question I asked when she said, do you have any questions for me? I said, yeah, is there any reason why you wouldn't hire me? And she spouted off a couple of reasons, that she didn't see sales experience. I didn't have a lot of sales experience. And all I heard was that you didn't get the job. Right. And so I left that interview just mentally, physically, emotionally, just drained. I went back to that halfway house and I went and crawled into my bunk bed and slept for, I think it was around noon. I slept that entire day, didn't wake up till the next morning, and then started to process the reality of the situation. And 2 days later, as I'm like starting to accept it, I get a call, and on my phone, and the user or the uh, caller ID, it says Microsoft. And I'm very confused. I'm like, why is Microsoft calling me? So I answer, and it's the recruiter offering me the job. And
Oh,
I was like, what? I literally yelled, like, and it was funny because the recruiter, she was she told me, she's like, oh my God, I never heard such an amazing response before. This is so great. You just made my day.
I love that. So
Yeah. And I started working at Microsoft, and I'll never forget my first day walking into the store, the Microsoft store, and just feeling like just looking around in complete just awe. And it was a very surreal moment for me. And coming to work to me was not just a job. This was an opportunity that was going to change my life. And it did.
incredible.
And
What
yeah,
was that first role that you had at Microsoft, and how has your role changed over time?
yeah, my roles changed a few different times. So I started out in the Microsoft retail store selling laptops to consumers. Then I got it promoted to service advisor, which was, like I don't know if you've ever been in like an Apple store where they have like the Genius bar and you can take your device there and the technicians will help you diagnose and repair, whatever's going on with your phone or your computer. I was that, but for Microsoft. So people would bring in their Windows computers and I would help fix them and do all of that. And it was really what, you know, prior to my arrest, I always had this affinity for technology. And so one of the things I like to do was build and fix computers. I actually ended up starting a computer repair company while I was in North Dakota. It was like my side job to my drug dealing.
Love that. Your side gig, computer repair.
Right. So here I was now doing it for Microsoft. And I was like, this is so cool. Making, decent wage. But my main goal was to get my foot in the door and with the retail store because that was low-hanging fruit for me and I didn't need a college degree and then work my way into corporate, which was where like that was my ultimate, vision. And I did that within a year and a half.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And then I became a surface technology solutions professional, which basically what it was I worked alongside the B2B sales rep and helped overcome any technical challenges or blockers that arose during the sales cycle. And that was my job. And I was in that role for about 3 months. And then the company decided that they were going to move all of the Surface TSPs and make them B2B sales reps. And then I became a Surface seller and or Surface Solutions specialist. That was my official title. And let me tell you, I was scared. I had never done B2B sales. I had no idea how to do this job and I was just kind of thrown into it. And that was another pivotal moment for me because it's like you either sink or swim in these moments, right? And I was like, I am going to swim, even if it's just my nose out of water, and I'm doggy paddling, but I'm going to figure this out. And I eventually did. And that it's people think, oh, I just want to get to this point, like, oh, because that for me, that was the top of the mountain, right? And I got to the top of the mountain, but like to stay at the top of the mountain is hard work. And it is not easy. And so I was determined to stay at the top of this mountain and learn everything I could. I reached out to all the top sellers that worked at Microsoft. I asked them to mentor me. I was in mentoring meetings 4 times a week with 4 different, sellers. And I was determined to figure this out. And then come 2022, I ended up becoming their number one Surface seller in the world.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I ended up winning a very prestigious award called Gold Club. And so that's where it's like a, President's Club or something where you get sent, they take you and your spouse on a wonderful getaway vacation for 7 days. It was just magical. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Still doing B2B sales now, or
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Been in the role now for 6 years. So
amazing.
yeah. I
Yes.
love it. I love B2B sales. I mean, there's an aspect of it that's the pressure sometimes is not so fun, but it is a lot of fun for the most part, like meeting people, talking to them, reframing their thinking about things, developing those relationships, pulling in those big deals, like, that's exciting. So I love sales. I'm a huge proponent. Like I believe that if you can get good at sales, you can do anything in life because really everything is about selling.
Yep. Selling yourself.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So and then after working at Microsoft, or after having, been working here now for what, over 8 years, about 2 years in the retail store, 6 years in corporate. And I'm thinking, okay, what else do I want to do? Because now, when you hit the top of the mountain, you got to be thinking, okay, what's next, right? And so for me, it was like, wow, I've got this platform now because of my story. Um, and I really want to help the incarcerated community and I want to help them succeed and find success the way I have. And so I started a company called Winner's Circle. And it's an in-prison rehabilitative and vocational training program. So it's a year-long program. We focus on the rehabilitation portion for the first 6 months or 6 to 8 months. And then we deal with the root cause of the incarceration, which is typically whatever trauma you experienced from your past, right? We deal with that. We get the person categorically more whole as an individual. And then we move on to the sales training. And we're getting ready to launch very soon. So it's
That's
just,
exciting.
yeah.
And when you say getting ready to launch, you're getting ready to launch the program
Yes.
live. Where will it be? What facility?
So we're going to launch it. So if it's one thing that Microsoft taught me, it's the importance of scale. And so we're going to launch it on the tablets. And that way, even the most remote prisons can now have access to rehabilitation. It's like a master class meets LinkedIn learning type training. So they're going to learn about all different topics, right? Everything from mindset to anger management to inner child work. A lot of the videos will be filmed, by subject matter experts. And we're also going to focus too on some of the spiritual aspects, for lack of better terms, like woo-woo stuff, meditation, even like breath work. We'll focus on teaching them about frequencies and how everything has a vibrational frequency and how that is important to know and why, to understand where they're operating at from a vibrational frequency and how to elevate that, right? And we'll teach them about law of attraction. We'll dive into that a little bit and how that works. And yeah, so it's just for me, it's like, okay, what are all the things that really helped me while I was incarcerated and helped me achieve this success? And it was all of the programming that I had done, all of the personal development. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, if I can do it, other people can do it too. They just need to have access to this information. How do we get them this access? Well, let's distribute it on the tablets.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So will it launch kind of nationally, or are you?
So we're going to start out doing a pilot in one of the prisons, and but we've been in communication with a couple private prisons, some of the tablet companies. They're very excited. They love the fact that I have lived experience. Um, Yeah, and that I'm doing this because not a lot of people, especially those with lived experience, are creating programs. So the fact that I am, they're like, oh, hurry up, get us this curriculum because they need it. And they see that I've achieved the success, you know, and they're excited. And it's just I think the challenges that come along with starting a company is sometimes the funding. So
I know all about that for sure.
yeah,
For
yeah,
sure. That is so impressive, though, and so exciting. And I'm
yeah,
curious what you think about that as you look at employment across the country and employers and that stigma that you referenced earlier, that
yeah,
fear. How have you seen fair chance hiring around the country change? And what do you think needs to happen to accelerate it?
yeah. So going through what I went through with Microsoft really created this passion inside of me to like step out and really be a voice about this specific topic. Because one of the sad realities of my situation is that had I been living in any other city, I wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. And I want to see more company or not more companies, I'm sorry, more states, more cities adopting this fair chance ordinance. Now, other cities have a fair chance ordinance, but they're not as robust as San Francisco's, unfortunately. But I think this should be a law in every state that we need to stop focusing on people's pasts. Yeah, we can run background checks and that's fine, but get context before you make a decision, right? Get to know the person before you just check a no box. Um, and for me, it's really how do I change the legacy mindset that these companies have? And that's really part of the reason why I wanted to get on the TEDx and talk about this because I knew it could reach a lot of people and then share my story with Microsoft because I think that also too shows other companies like, hey, if Microsoft can do it, then what are we so afraid of? And look what this girl did achieve at the company. And hopefully, change this perspectives from that, from that story. And then, because when you think about it, what Microsoft does, other companies follow suit, you know?
Sure. Yeah,
And I know that me getting this job at Microsoft was all part of this bigger plan. I
yeah,
mean, because if you think about like my story and the impact that it has, let's say it was just some mom and pop, you know, Bob's Electronics or something, it's not going to have the impact that it does with Microsoft. And I know that this company was meant to be a part of the story to make a bigger impact in the world.
I love that. And have you seen any movement within Microsoft, like since this happened to you?
Yes.
Has the company created programs? Talk about what you've seen Microsoft do in response to this.
So when I challenged them in San Francisco, part of what they had to do was they had to change their hiring policies, but only in San Francisco city limits. So basically they were forced to become a fair chance employer in San Francisco, but then it branched out. So I was essentially their case study. I was their first um like basically like they get to really see, okay, we've just hired this, in their eyes, ex-felon, and they're expecting me to do all of these things and be this horrible employee. And when they saw that I wasn't, it lessened the fear for them. And so what ended up eventually happening is Microsoft joined the Second Chance Business Coalition, made a public statement about being a fair chance employer. And I think, as they saw my progression and everything I'd been achieving, really at the end of the day, it's not about the person's past, it's about who they are today. And I think they realized that. And then they went public with my story with PBS NewsHour. And then not only that, but Microsoft also started a program called Leap where they hire underserved, talent or people from underserved communities, including the formerly incarcerated, put them through a boot camp and then hire them at Microsoft for various roles. Um, and I got to help, start that.
So cool. I love
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would love to get some information about that because when people use our tools, so we've had in January, we just surpassed 20,000 people who are on our platform, typing in their name and date of birth, just figuring out what's on their record, what are their options to get rid of their record. But as people create accounts, we ask them a number of questions that we use to try to help them, right? And we ask, are you working full-time, part-time? What industry are you working in? If your record were not a barrier, what industry would you want to go in?
Hmm.
And tech and health are the top two fields
Yeah,
because that's where the careers are,
100%.
And so if someone says they want to go into tech, I'm just so inspired by your journey. I would love to send them an email saying, Microsoft has this LEAP program. Here's how you apply. And also, here's a video of Shelley, like someone just like you
Yeah.
who has had a lot of success. And I really think capitalizing on that opportunity, connecting people to opportunities and networks where they feel like they have no chance, right? But then offering up an example of someone who's been where they are and has had the success, it really psychologically helps people to dream bigger and break down that judgment and that stigma that they've attached to themselves.
Yep.
And so I want to do that with as many people as we possibly can. So any information you can send, we got 20,000 people. Their main goal in life, in clearing their record, is to get a better employment opportunity,
Yep.
most of them, to support their families and build a different future for their kids. That element of your story is so common to so many people we serve. And of course, half of the kids in America have at least one parent who's been justice involved.
Hmm.
So anyway, please send me information. Thank you for being so inspiring and for being willing to chat with me and talk to me about your amazing journey.
Yeah.
We're almost at time here. Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you want to share?
Um, no, I mean, I think I covered mostly all the important things. And, I think for me, it's like talking about the work that I'm doing today and, I'm I'm looking at potentially like really doing this full time. And, although I've had an excellent career at Microsoft, for me, it's like, okay, now now I need to focus on this restorative justice work. And so that I'll have that, an update for you soon, but, that might be where I head, in this next journey of my life, this next chapter. So,
I love that.
yeah.
Unless you want to come work for Ross and do B2B sales. Um, yeah, amazing. I guess one last question. What advice would you give to somebody much earlier in their journey?
My advice would be to not let society or what you've done, your past define you, that you are so much more than that. And although starting out on this journey may feel scary, but that just to continue, no matter how many hurdles you come up against, or, just to continue to persevere, and that eventually you will achieve what you want, and to keep a positive mindset. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't fall into the victim mentality, the woe is me, everything's so hard, my life sucks, the society hates me, because if you have that type of thinking, you will have those types of um I guess, your thoughts become your life, basically.
Yeah,
And to try to stay positive and know that anything is achievable as long as you're willing to transform the way you view the world, be more positive, set intentions, and then go after it.
I love that. Well, your life is definitely an example of that. Um, so your son is 10 now.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about the future for him as you look at what he might do?
Well, I I think that because of my experience, I really hope that he learns when, because I he knows my story, and I hope that it encourages or influences him to stay on the right path, or else he's going to have all these struggles like his mom. And because of who I am today, and where I'm at from a mindset perspective, right? I'm really just, I pour love and positivity into him. And so I really think that um his future is going to be very bright. He's in every sport. Like, he just got done with football. He's now into basketball. After basketball is baseball. And so we're really, keeping him busy is really important. Keeping him doing things that are really productive, and just pouring love and light into him, I think is going to help him be a successful man one day.